Hello everyone, I'm back. You should have already watched the video that's up there-ish. It's up there on your screen, but you should have watched that. I just read through the story. If you didn't read through it with me, you should read it on your own first and just review what the writing prompt is. Now, I want to go over some kind of tips and things to remember when you're planning for your story and when you start writing. So, as we know, we are continuing the story. The story starts off with Sally and Mrs. Chipley running around, and you learn that they're taking Sally to her aunt's house. So, the first thing I want to remind you to do is to include what are called compositional risks, or things like figurative language, dialogue, complex sentences. Sorry. You want to include those things. It makes your writing more interesting. So earlier in the week, we practiced stretching your sentence. We practiced using dialogue. We practiced making your writing sound better and more using better words. That kind of stuff you need to keep in mind. You notice in this story, the part that they've written, they don't use first grade vocabulary. They use good vocabulary. They use similes and metaphors. There's plenty of dialogue in this story. For example, right here on paragraph 2, you see dialogue right off the bat. Then there's great imagery. They said her hand bumped in a steady rhythm against her right leg. She could have just said her suitcase hit her leg, but no, they said it bumped in a steady rhythm against her right leg. That gives such a better picture in your mind of what the author is wanting you to visualize. It also just sounds really good. So you want to include some of that in your own writing when you continue this story. I also want you to remember that you need to be writing in the same tone of voice. So in this narrative writing prompt, they want you to continue the story. Well, you don't want your part of the story to sound like a completely different story. You want it to be a continuation. So at first, if they use only occasional dialogue, so it seems like here they use a little dialogue. There's one up here, and then on the next page, we don't want that. Hello, everybody. Don't want that. Then on the next page, you see a little more here, a conversation between Sally and Miss Chipley. It's not a whole lot, but there definitely is dialogue there. If your next portion that you write has no dialogue, that doesn't make sense. The original story had dialogue in it. Your story should have dialogue in it. This example has a lot of adjectives and adverbs and descriptive language. They really try to describe everything in detail. At the paragraph 4, I think it was, she's talking about how the sky had darkened and the streetlights had bloomed. Or in paragraph 3, she's describing everything from the color of the suitcase to how she's gripping the handle, the color of the things, the hair that's flowing. She describes her hat and the feather. This is a very, very descriptive story. So when you finish the story, you should be writing very, very descriptively. It should sound like if someone who didn't know that two people wrote this, if they read it all together, they should assume, this is just written by one person. It shouldn't be obvious that you took over and changed the writing style. Also, remember to just stay focused on the task. Yesterday, we talked about tapping it out, and we learned exactly what it is they're wanting you to do. Make sure you're completing those tasks. So you need to be answering what happens next. Keep in mind their personalities, the characters in the setting. So we know where Sally's going, right? She's going to stay with her aunt for a few days. So we know the main characters in the story are going to be Sally and her aunt. So if you randomly start adding in characters and you completely forget about her aunt, then you're going to be way off track. They have narrowed in where your story is going. You just have to finish it. Make sure to include a plot in your story. So we earlier in the week talked about the story maps, where there's that rising action. There are events that lead up to a big climax where the story changes, or that conflict happens where it's resolved. Then you have the falling action where it wraps up the story. You need to make sure your story has that. So right here, they've kind of given you that exposition or the start of the story where they tell you about it. And they've given you a little bit of the rising action, but you need to finish it. So you need some sort of climax and then a falling action. Okay? That means you're going to have to create the conflict or create the problem in this story. So maybe the problem will be something that happens once she gets to her aunt's house. Maybe the problem is that they can't find her aunt's house. Maybe the problem or the conflict is between her and her aunt. When she arrives, they get into an argument or something. Whatever it is, there has to be some sort of conflict. You will never read a story where there is no problem that needs solving. So you need to make sure that you are including that in your story. And where there's a problem, there has to be some sort of solution. You need to resolve that problem. And then finally, just remember good grammar, punctuation, use spell check when you're writing and planning, all of that. So those were the main reminders I wanted to go over. And then I wanted you to fill in the story map. So this should be pretty easy. This is just kind of planning where you want the story to go. And Monday we're going to start writing. So we already know who our characters are, right? Who are our characters? Sally and her aunt. And maybe you could include more of Mrs. Chipley. But it seems like she's kind of exiting the story. So at least we know we have those characters. We know the setting. The setting is going to be Sally's aunt's house. But the problem and the solution, that's what I want you to fill in for your homework. You're going to plan out when you write the story next week, what the problem will be, how it will continue, and then how you're going to solve it. Okay? If you have any questions or need any help, reach out to your teacher or myself. Have a great day.